Thank you for having me today. I will share my screen. I see everyone kind of just introducing yourselves on the chat. That's great. I'll try to keep up with the chat as we go along the presentation as well. So I'm gonna share my slides. All right, I believe they're visible for everyone. Yes. Okay, perfect. All right. Um, Okay, so today I will be talking about conducting effective, equitable community engagement. And the agenda for today is the following. I'll do a short introduction about myself. I will then move into defining broadly what is equitable engagement, to talk about why it is important, the differences between co-design processes and participatory processes. And then I'll show you a couple of case studies. A case study about Mi Taxi or My Taxi, a project I developed through my PhD in Mexico City, and a case study from some of my colleagues at the Burns Center on the Future of Work Task Force in New Jersey, in the state of New Jersey. And finally, I'll wrap up with some considerations that you might want to take into account while designing an engagement process. Now, please feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. There's a couple of breaks throughout my presentation where I would love to hear from you. So if you want to just jot down your thoughts and comments on the chat, I'll be going through them as we go along. And yeah, please just feel free to participate throughout the workshop. So, who am I? I'm just gonna place the chat over here to keep it under my eyes. So I am Sofa Bosch Gmez. I am currently an assistant professor at the College of Arts, Media and Design at Northeastern University and a fellow at the Burns Center. But I am a former public sector professional myself. I started my career working for the Mexico City government in its innovation lab, doing visual communication, implementing design thinking processes. I later worked for the Mexican federal government in its national digital strategy, using human-centered design methods to digitize and develop novel services for various internal stakeholders and for constituents as well. I was quite fascinated at the time by the relevance of using design methods to iterate and create public services that could change and impact people's lives. So at that point, I decided I really wanted to know more. I wanted to research more on the topic and decided to pursue a PhD at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And once I was done with my degree, I joined Northeastern, and that's my current role. So as you can see, most of my career has been a bit with one foot in the public sector and one in academia, with quite a practice-based approach in my research and academic work. So I was born and raised in Mexico City. It's a very large city, a city of 22 million people. And I really see public service as the place where we can have true impact in people's everyday lives. It's a way of taking care of our neighbors, of our communities, and of our cities, of our urban environments. And when I started as a public servant in Mexico, there were many issues that we had to deal with, right? Like transportation issues or security problems or water scarcity. And we still have those issues, we still have those problems. But at that time, what really motivated me to get involved was to think about place-based solutions and how larger complex problems manifested at a local level. It really made me interested in the diversity of lived experiences within the same city, in these localities. And in a city that is quite diverse, right? So The image on the left of the screen is the central part of the city, but then the southern part of the city is considered a rural area. And it looks like the image on the right side. And that really struck me when I was working for the government because I was thinking, well, this is a big challenge. How do you develop services that need to truly serve everyone and respond to very, very different daily lived experiences? How do you make the voices of those communities, different communities, very central to the development of those services? It is a big task. It is a very big challenge. So, with that context as a backdrop, I would like for us to discuss a little bit further what is equitable engagement. So, if you could please just jot down on the chat your thoughts on how would you define equitable community engagement, or if you're doing it right now in your roles and your work, how do you do it? Like, how do you define it? And I will give everyone a minute just to add comments on the chat. I see a Sophia that is also an alum from Northeastern and CMU. A lovely coincidence. Okay, so we see reciprocal and non-extractive. I love that. Yes. Community outreach and engagement. Mhm. Inviting all members of the community with differing levels of powers. Yes, absolutely. I'll talk about that in a minute. Joint decision making. Yes. Equitable community engagement is meeting people where they are to give them an equal or same experience as intended. Absolutely. Including community members in planning, decision making. Equitable doesn't mean equal. That's a great point. It means engaging the community in fair ways. Absolutely. Engagement that centers the voices of the people that we're designing for. Absolutely. Holistic analysis. I love that. That's a very systemic perspective of it. Starting out to define it by understanding the landscape that needs to be covered. Intentional, inclusive design. Yes. Providing services to all populations. Yes. Inclusion, participation, an opportunity to collaborate and co-create with community members. I love that. Compensating people for all their work and expertise. Yeah, that's a great point, Ashley. And that is something that I will also talk about in the presentation. Providing resources, communications in their language to allow full participation. Absolutely, that's kind of meeting communities where they're at. An example is included on our project management board. We require a variety of stakeholders be represented, including youth, business, disabled, government, etc. Yes, not taking a one size fits all approach. I love that. I love that. Designing different engagement opportunities for different parts of the community. Absolutely. So different parts of the pipeline will require different sorts of engagement. Thank you. Thank you so, so much for all of your comments. These are really great. Um, so the way I define it is very broad, right? But really touching upon some of your comments, it's fair collaboration and fair participation. Um, so let's take, for example, a researcher, a policymaker, or a designer, and they are trying to define or understand a problem or social situation to take action, to design something that responds to a need or that mitigates a problem. So, depending on their disciplinary background, personal experience, or even political views, they might approach the definition of that problem from a particular stance. And sometimes expertise or personal assumptions may blind us from understanding the problem or situation from another perspective, from the perspective of the people who are mostly impacted by the problem or are most in need of that public service or program. So in order to have a more complete idea of what the problem is or garner solutions, understand the impact that we are creating, we want to get the point of view and opinion of the communities and people experiencing the issue firsthand. as well as other relevant stakeholders. So basically, we want to research a problem or situation and slowly build our research and perception of that situation. We might do that in different ways. We might do that tapping upon already existing data, doing secondary research. We might do that by sending out a survey, doing interviews or focus groups, right? But then we want to complement it, including the perspective of relevant stakeholders and key actors. These might be experts in the matter, right? People that have been working in these topics for a really, really long time, researchers, academics, people from nonprofits, etc. And then all of these research, we want to complement it with the perspective of people kind of living some of these experiences firsthand. So in the work that you are currently doing, is engaging communities central to your work? If it is, why? And if it is not currently central, why do you feel it's not? And again, if you would like to just write it down on the chat, I'll go through some of them. Any comments? Yes, very central. Thank you. We have a comment. It is central to get changing communities, oops, involving them and creating engagement in ways they can holistically participate in will create lasting change. Absolutely. It isn't yet, but I am working to add this in my work. It should be central to engage its current and potential data users, especially those who can get the most impact from our data, for sure. Sometimes, but not always. One of the biggest barriers I face is bandwidth. Yes, that is a very big issue. I think in general for anyone doing this sort of work, especially in the public sector, and it requires time for sure. Thoughtful engagement requires a lot of time. Yes, I want a lot more engagement for sure. Yes, central, but being in a remote environment, we don't engage as much as we would like to. My work is tailored to closing the digital divide in a rural community. Very central community-based education and conservation program, giving people the tools to successfully implement activities. I feel like it should be part of our data and innovation team, but not always. Seems more focused on helping departments with data projects. Okay. It is not, and one of the main reasons is that it is regarded as a specific activity of social innovation projects. Digital public services projects are too blinded by technology challenges. That's a really great point. Very central community engagement. Is important to ensuring the outcomes that we are seeking. Absolutely, in order to lead with the intentional work of innovation and impact, it is so necessary. I couldn't agree more. Central to my work, but there are challenges with including all of the community. It is dependent on who agrees to participate and limits to being able to recruit specifically based on underserved demographics. Yes. And that is a really great point. How do we avoid burdening the communities that are already underserved, right, with more requests regarding participation? Yes, one of my office's primary methods for deciding what should go into regulation is talking with the public. We invite public comments on proposed laws. I love that. It's central because our design expertise isn't enough to design services that fit aligned to community visions of the future needs. Also central due to our historical and current wrongdoing against communities that have eroded trust and degraded relationships. Yes. Engaging communities is very essential to my work because it enables me to help make social services accessible to immigrant communities. I love that. Helps build trust and empowers folks to access benefits from services. And the last one, central, we are building an interdisciplinary platform. I'm just going to say jointfamily.us that seeks to breach the digital and generational divide through science, arts, and tech. I love that. I am going to save that link and look at it after the talk. Thank you for sharing. Excellent. I love all of these examples. So there are a lot of challenges that go into some of these processes, participatory processes, and I would love for us to discuss them further in the Q&A portion of the talk. So me, Sophia, this is what I decided to pursue in my research and for my work. So I consider it extremely important and kind of crucial, central to the work that I do. So before I go deeper into some of the examples and the minutia between co-design and participatory work, I would like to give you an example of a project I led in Mexico. So while working for the Mexican National Digital Strategy, I was asked to carry out a testing exercise in collaboration with the Ministry of Labor for a job offering and seeking platform, very similar to the very famous private one that links people together. So we went to the Ministry of Labor's office where there were a lot of people doing in-person procedures. Some of these procedures would take quite a while. So while they waited, we asked them to step into a room with computers and a set of instructions that we provided. And some of the instructions asked them to use the platform to find a job in the service industry, for example, or to post a job offering regarding a certain position. And after we did that exercise, we realized from people's feedback that the platform needed very minor design tweaks. It was quite straightforward and easy to use. But what was missing was a very important component, jobs in the agricultural sector. So a few young men that were doing a procedure on site um, and that work in this sector told us, well, all of the jobs in this platform are jobs that you'd find in the city. We work on the fields, right? But we also are connected. We also have phones and internet, and we would love to see offerings that allowed us to, I don't know, look for work in harvesting avocados for the first part of the season, and then going to the harvest of blackberries, right? So one of our main recommendations to the Ministry of Labor was the addition of a new section, as well as doing more research on how producers and kind of producers could post those openings. So it was really bringing to the spotlight the needs of a community that is connected and is as linked as anyone else in the country, but somehow, because certain perspective or biases from the central offices in Mexico City, they hadn't been taken into consideration when developing the platform. So going again back to a bit of theory, the reason why equitable engagement is important in the public sector is because in today's world, we are running into very complex social problems that are intertwined with ecological, political, economic ones. The big issue with these problems is that they are complex because different stakeholder groups see them differently. They define them differently. And therefore, they approach solutions from a very different perspective or different angles. There is a need to understand those different perspectives, to coordinate, to connect, and to respond to those needs, especially for communities that have been systematically not been taken into account when defining those problems. It is especially important to do so in the public sector because our public institutions are the guardians of common assets. They are the guardians of our shared resources and the protection of local residents' well-being. So these complex problems are interconnected. An ecological problem sprawls into a social or economic one that connects into a political one, and so on. And we experience that on a daily basis. They cast a shadow on people's everyday lives, layering on top of each other. Now, these problems are an umbrella. They are large, they are complex, but the way that they manifest is really truly in local forms. And that's why understanding the experience of those communities, I experienced them firsthand, is so important. I think this cartoon sums it up pretty well. It is not one thing, but the complex combination of multiple problems that shape those lived experiences, right? In the case of this cartoon, the houseless situation. So these are examples of problems that are incredibly complex and manifest in very different ways. And depending on the place of the locality, they will manifest differently as well, right? So the opioid overdose epidemic, for example, why is it that it is manifesting in West Virginia so intensely? Well, there are a certain set of reasons, right? Or ecological problems. Climate change manifests very differently in particular places of the country or even the world. We've seen it with the wildfires, we've seen it with hurricanes, etc. The contemporary consequences of public service provision, right? And the existence of food deserts, for example, and other urban problems related to redlining in the early 20th century. So again, I would love to hear a little bit from you and learn what sort of strategies have you used in order to ensure that community voices are genuinely heard and reflected in decision making, if it's the case of the work that you're doing. User testing, yes, I love that. If you could specify if it's user testing in digital form or do you do it in person? Door-to-door surveys, town halls, focus groups, yes. So more kind of in person, social media surveys, yes, absolutely. Posting documents on a public site for a given period of time for comment, that's, yes, a really good practice. User testing digitally, but would love to do in person in the future, yes. Advisory committees with community representation, add them to the team. Oops, I lost that one. As equal decision makers. Victor, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I'm going to touch upon that in a minute, talking about code design. Social listening and user research, virtual and in-person workshops. Yes, if we cannot engage with end users, then we try to collaborate with a diverse group of stakeholders who have different engagement with the population. Yes, looking for a network that supports the project, that supports the service. Showing quantitative statistics to leadership. Yes, that is so important because the buy-in and it comes also from the top, the higher levels, right? Top to bottom. That is so great. So I want to talk a bit from the perspective of the difference between co-design and participatory processes, since we use this terminology kind of as synonyms continuously. But I think there are very core differences in which it might be really important to have to articulate kind of the differences between the two of them. So um, in both cases, they mean collaboration and participation, but in practice, they are practiced very differently. So when we talk about co-design, we understand that designer, researcher, public worker, as one of the stakeholder groups defining the problem or developing a design solution. The community at the forefront of the issue will be another core stakeholder. And then, of course, other key actors, other key stakeholders, which could be public agencies, it could be leadership, could be academics, could be activists. And in a co-design process, they are all at the same level, right? It is that non-hierarchical collaboration that Victor was referring to, and which is key. They all have the same input in the definition of the problem, in devising a solution, and in the evaluation of a result. So really closing the entire loop. Now, this requires a lot of trust and cooperation, and therefore co-designing may be more time consuming. It might be a slower process. It might require more coordination and negotiation, and the process will take longer. Now, in participatory design, the designer, researcher, or public servant is in charge of making sense of the data that is being gathered. So the community and other stakeholders' inputs actually feed into the designer, public sector worker, researcher, and therefore there is a sort of hierarchy in the process that we need to acknowledge. We are making sense of the data for them and feeding that into our final design features. So it works as a sort of a funnel in decision making, where opinions, feelings, information about the community perhaps and other actors is compiled. And this difference is quite important as it determines how much participation there actually is, and if there is a reinterpretation of what is needed in the process. Therefore, a participatory process may be faster, but more responsibility relies in the designer or public sector worker in compiling the community's insights, right? There is a higher level of accountability and in channeling that information into the final design outcome. That design can be a service, it can be a program, it can be a platform, etc. So just to exemplify this, I'll present two case studies before wrapping up with another set of questions for you. So this first example is a bit more qualitative, and the second example regarding the state of New Jersey is more geared towards the use of technology in order to foster participation. So in 2019, I collaborated with the Digital Public Innovation Agency in Mexico City for the development of the city's taxi app. It was a project that involved doing research about the state of affairs of public taxis in the city, doing service design, and then user experience and user interface, UX UI, for the implementation of the app. And the design team I was working with and myself, we could have approached the project from a very design-oriented perspective. Since at the end of the day, we were designing a digital platform, right? We could have scoped what was already existing, right, out there, private apps, and kind of translated some of those features into our proposal. However, we took very seriously the importance of including the lived experiences of those involved in the use of public taxis in the city. So before giving you kind of the overview of the project, for context, Mexico City at the time had 140,000 taxis. And from those 140,000, 25 to 30,000 taxis were considered pirate taxis. So taxis that were not do not hold a medallion, the equivalent to a medallion here. So informal taxis. They look like a taxi, they're painted like a taxi, but they're not actually a taxi, a registered taxi. The Ministry of Transportation did not have a complete database of all the cars and drivers, especially of the drivers, because each taxi had 1 to 5 drivers in order to keep the taxi working 24/7 and maximize profits, right? So this created a very complex panorama for us to think about how we would engage not only users of like taxi riders, but also taxi drivers. Now, in parallel to what seemed to be a project that meant to be tailored towards a transportation and creating a database of taxis, Mexico City lived at that moment very high levels of insecurity and violence, especially against women. And in the lapse of 2 weeks, there were 3 femicides. So the murder of women for identifying as women. And the problem is that they had been kidnapped on board of public taxis. So it became a very pressing issue. And it became a pressing issue specifically for women living in the periphery of the city that really had no other choice but to take public taxis as a part of their transportation legs to get to the center of the city to work. And it became central to the mayor's agenda in the mayor's agenda. So taking into consideration that it suddenly became an issue of safety and transportation in parallel, these 2 issues were kind of crucial to the project. We determined that we needed very different levels of engagement to understand the problem, and therefore we needed different groups to engage with. So the first group we engaged were other public sector workers and experts from other ministries and agencies within the Mexico City government. We then asked ourselves, well, who are the most impacted groups by unsafe taxi rides? And we decided that we would have 2 groups of people we wanted to talk to. People that we grouped under very broadly civil society, quote unquote, residents using taxis, and then taxi drivers. Because of the context of the time, we did some work with mixed groups, but mainly focused on women. Let me go back for a second. So we mainly focused on women, and we tried to segment taxi drivers into 2 groups. We segmented them into what we called senior drivers, which were drivers that had been driving taxis for 30 years, right? And that they really did not want to use a technological tool in order to do their work. They were very averse to it. And then we had what we call junior drivers, quote unquote. These were more recent generations. Perhaps they would drive a private taxi in the mornings and then a public one in the afternoons. They were more acquainted with the technology and kind of very eager to adopt an app that would allow them to do their job. We then did workshops and group conversations with all of them, and we got some very, very interesting insights. We distilled those insights and kind of touched base with the Ministry of Transportation just to corroborate that some of the information that we were getting was aligning with the observations of some of these public sector workers that had been in the Ministry of Transportation, again, for 20 years, right? And that had a lot of experience in these topics. So some of the insights that we got, for example, were that most women would actually use a third-party app like WhatsApp in order to share their location with family members and friends when they were riding a taxi. On the other hand, taxi drivers also expressed a lot of fear when working, and they had also been subjected to a lot of peril and violence in their daily work. And they were also very used to using apps like WhatsApp to communicate with other drivers when there was an issue or something came up. We also learned that there was very little trust in perhaps having an emergency button, because participants of our workshops considered that if something happened and the emergency button was pressed, there would be no response from the government, right? That no response would be elicited. So that lack of trust was something that we really wanted to tackle and work on. So we created a set of very low resolution prototypes, and they were printed on paper, shared back with those working groups. I wish that I could show you some of the visuals, but I can't because of the documentation process was part of the agency's kind of internal documents. But yes, basically we printed them out and just shared those with them on paper to start conversations of the sort of features that they wanted to see and some of even of the graphic features of the app. From there, we determined the main functions that we wanted to address, that we wanted to include in the app. And once those functions and features were determined, we went back to our internal group of public sector workers and started to see what was already existing, right? What sort of protocols could connect some of these features and what protocols needed to be developed from scratch. Now, some of the protocols needed a lot of collaboration and coordination amongst the diversity of public offices. So our first goal was to kind of onboard our policy analysts, our internal admin in order to create those connections and build that coordination amongst agencies. Once we did that, and thinking that I should mention this, one of the biggest protocols that we had to develop was the emergency button one. There wasn't no protocol before we did this, and we worked very, very tightly with the Central Security Office in Mexico City in order to develop the whole procedure for the button, one sole button to work. And finally, once we got it working, we decided that we really wanted to test it out there, right, on the ground. So we wanted to make sure that the emergency button would actually trigger that newly designed protocol. This is a map of Mexico City, and we wanted to really test it out in those communities that did not have access to private transportation apps and that lived in non-affluent areas of the city, basically the ones marked in green. Those are the most affluent areas of the city and the airport. And we also wanted to test it in the peripheries where we had low connectivity areas and where we had really high levels of peril for women. So we were trying to set the harshest conditions for the phase, the testing phase. Now, these are the areas where we did the tests with the parameters that we selected. And we collaborated with taxi drivers who just drove us around some of these areas. And we would randomly press the emergency button and then allow we would take the time for the procedure and the protocol to go through until we got stopped by a police car. At the beginning, when we did the tests, it would take them around 13 minutes to stop the taxi. And we tested it multiple times, doing a lot of iterations with the developers until we got it down to 2 to 3 minutes, which for a woman in peril inside of a taxi or a cab can be really, that time is crucial, right? So these are the early prototypes that we used to test the app. And as you can see, they still have some glitches, but it didn't matter. We wanted to test it as soon as we could so that we could iterate as many times as needed and get feedback from taxi drivers and from the team testing the app. And that really helped us just to go back with the developers and with the policy teams and iterate as quickly as possible. It also is worth mentioning that because of the conversations we had with taxi drivers, the app worked as a mirror, and all of the features that users had were also available for taxi drivers because it really came to light how many of them had faced very similar insecurity issues. So the app actually connected to a third-party app, in this case, WhatsApp, so that both riders and drivers could share very easily their location. And that learning curve on how to use the app was much faster than if they had to kind of learn how to do it within the ecosystem of the app. And this is an image of the final app in use. I still have 10, 15 minutes left, so I just want to go quickly through the second example from a participatory process developed by the Future of Work Task Force in the state of New Jersey. and which was responsible for understanding the impact of technological developments in the labor and employment landscape in the state mainly. So this was during the pandemic in 2020. The task force asked New Jersey residents what they felt were the challenges that technology created to the future of work. And from that input, the task force would create a set of recommendations for the state. They used a tool that allows to submit ideas and rank them in a very easy voting-like manner. It's called All Our Ideas, and I'm happy to put the link at the end of the talk on the chat so that you have access to it. It's open source. It's open for anyone to use. And they had nearly 4,000 people respond and participate on the call. The really large number of participants was a result of collaborating. Some of you were mentioning on the chat, kind of working with other groups and kind of creating a network in order to support engagement if you don't have perhaps the resources or the bandwidth to do it directly yourself. This is exactly what they did. They used and they collaborated, I'm sorry, with over 40 community stakeholders and workforce organizations that shared the call that helped them get the word out. And actually, I have the link right here. So I'm just going to put the link on the chat that way you can have it. And I will also share the link, I had it in the previous slide, to the document that summarizes this project, which I just think is so great. And then from that collection of ideas that was gathered through the platform, 166 different problem statements were drafted, and participants were asked to choose which problem was of greater concern in two randomized options that the platform presented. Those were later used as inputs for the task force's recommendations. So people would just go in and vote very easily, one statement or the other. And also because New Jersey has a really large Spanish-speaking community, absolutely all of the prompts and materials were translated into Spanish, which was also one of the comments that was added on the chat, right? How do you create that language justice component into engagement processes? Now, even if we create a co-design or participatory process, there will be a need of facilitation of connecting with people, right? These cannot just happen organically, especially if we are doing it in a qualitative form, more face-to-face rather than using digital tools in order to collect opinions, to collect thoughts. And so I really want to share this quote from Emma Blomkamp. She's an Australian scholar and practitioner who has extensively written about co-designing in the public sector. And this is from a paper that she wrote a couple of years ago. I'll also put it on the chat. I just like to give you all my resources so that you can also have them. And it basically says, although they may be creative experts, right, the communities that we serve, in their own lives, many people are likely to need support or facilitation to express themselves in meaningfully participating co-design. An important part of the co-design process is having a skilled facilitator who can choose the most appropriate tools to enable people to communicate and engage with each other, as well as feel comfortable and inspired enough to envision their own and others' ideas. So that's another role or component to take into account when creating a participatory process. Who is going to be part of the team? What are the sort of profiles and roles that we need in order to facilitate these processes? So just to wrap up, I want to go through some considerations you might take into account when conducting an engagement of your own. And this comes from this other really fantastic resource from colleagues at the GovLab. And it's called Collective Intelligence, a checklist for the public sector. And I'll also put the link on the chat so that you have it. So I love it because they created a flow chart that helps you determine if doing community engagement is the right thing to do for your project. Mainly when working and providing services with perhaps communities that have been historically been disadvantaged, right, or underserved. We don't want to burden them even further. Um, so it's important to try to avoid that for participation fatigue with ongoing requests. So this is a helpful tool in order to determine in the first place if you actually need to design a participatory process or not. So the first thing to consider is, have you articulated the project's goals? Kind of learning objectives, right? Or a main research question. You want to know exactly what you want to get out of engaging people, of having them participate and lend you their time. Therefore, you want to also identify the right participants. Maybe not all stakeholders or not all key actors need to be engaged at every single step of the process, but rather in different moments of the pipeline, right? Can you reach the participants you've identified? Maybe we don't have direct contact with some of those communities and we need to do it through an intermediary, through networks, through organizers, through nonprofits, etc. So how are we going to reach those communities or those stakeholders? Who is the right owner of the project, right? Every project that engages people needs to have an accountable owner who can be inside or even outside of government, but can create that coalition of partners that is going to champion the project, that is going to push it further, right? Have you included any incentives for participation? Some of you also noted on the chat that incentives are a big part of this. I think incentives are very culturally contextual. My experience is that in the US, it is very common practice to compensate participants for their time and to provide support if needed, right? So perhaps childcare during the time that the workshops or the conversations might take, but also perhaps a compensation to get to the place if it's in face-to-face, right? Um, Doing this sort of work in Mexico, compensation in that sense was poorly seen because it could be misinterpreted in spaces where corruption is very high. You don't want, we did not want that to be interpreted in any way or form in that sense. So compensating people to participate was not well seen, right? So that's why I mean that it's culturally contextual. Have you defined the tasks and some of those roles that are going to push the project and the engagement forward? Who is going to facilitate? Who is going to provide the materials? Who is going to do qualitative coding after the interviews, etc.? Have you established the workflow? How long is this going to take? The taxi app example that I was giving you, for example, was a very quick project. We did everything in 3 months, and that created very intense workflows that I don't think were sustainable in the long run. We had to do that because it became a very crucial project for the administration at the time, and because of the security concerns. But the workflow needs to kind of respond to the, again, contextual circumstances. How will you evaluate the inputs? How will you know that the information you are receiving is actually what you need to know in order to feed the project, in order to co-create the project? How will you use those gained insights? So this is the entire list. And again, you can find them in the document that I provided. And yes, all links and the summary will be provided as well with the recording. So challenges to consider. There are many, right? You already touched upon some of them. But I would love to hear again from you in developing an engagement process. What are some of the challenges that you've encountered, or some perhaps that you anticipate facing, and how do you think that this could be mitigated? Perhaps this could be an open question that we discuss more as a group during the Q&A part of the session. Um, and so just to finish, I just want to say there are a lot of resources out there. For example, the work done at the Urban Institute is just so great. And they have extensive experience doing equitable engagement with local governments. And they publish everything openly. This document is also, I'll provide it for you on the chat as well. And so, yes, I would just say try to support your work from what is out there, and also from any other courses, right, or materials that can be openly accessible to you all. For example, Innovate US and the courses that are provided through Innovate US, might they be connected to new technologies like AI or human-centered processes, innovation skills, etc. So this is just an overview of some of the courses that are provided. And with that, I would like to wrap up. You have my email there. I am also on LinkedIn if you ever want to connect. I am more than happy to keep on discussing these topics, and I hope this was useful for you all. Thank you. I'll stop